Talking about chapter 4. That's not chapter 4. This should be chapter 3. There we go. Chapter 3. We're talking about chapter 3. As you may know, I have changed textbooks. And the reason I did that is because this textbook is about $100 cheaper than the other textbook. And I figure, hey, why not? I'm not sure how they figure out how much to charge for these things, but if I can find you a cheaper textbook, let's go ahead and do it. The reality is that most of the information in a social psychology text, or just about any text, are about the same, whether it's written by Aronson or whether it's written by Franzoy or whether it's written by Miller. It really doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, I guess, to them, but most of the information is about the same. Um, you will. This is a newer text than the Aronson textbook. The reason I was using the Aronson textbook is because that's what was being used when I arrived at Diné College. I'm not sure who picked it out, but this is a cheaper textbook company, which may be one of the reasons why we Follett had such a difficult time getting it on in their roster. Because they weren't making enough profit off of it, so they just kind of delayed getting it up. But I'm not switching back. This textbook's about the same. Hardly any additions compared to what we had before. Let me move this over. There we go. That's good. Okay, sorry. I should have done that before. Okay, so that's the reason. And as I just emailed everyone, and I told you all that I can only stay about a week ahead, and so for those of you who like to work ahead, you're sorry about that. I can't work that far ahead. I've got lots of things. I'm also the chair of the psychology department. Because of that, I've got a lot of extra things that I'm not a lot. I've got some extra things that I have to do, and I'm teaching 5 classes, so not the easiest thing in the world to stay on top of these things. And I'm a procrastinator, just like a lot of people are, especially students. So let's go ahead and get started on this fairly extensive chapter. This is chapter 3, and in the other textbook it was chapter 4. So that's one of the reasons there, and that's the biggest difference. They just kind of move things around, so all the textbooks don't look exactly the same. Then it would look like everybody was copying them. Anyway, wait a minute. Okay. Sorry, I just had to check one more thing. So let's go ahead and get started on this one. One of the great things, I like putting PowerPoints together. I really enjoy it. And there's a lot of pictures. And the reason there's a lot of pictures is because I like pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, that whole thing. Um, a PowerPoint slide with only words is pretty damn boring. So I get to pick out a new PowerPoint slide with each chapter. The old ones are kind of boring. The old ones I made up, who knows how long ago. I've been teaching social psychology for 15 years, or 20 years or so. Anyway, and back then the PowerPoint slides were very exciting, and they are far more exciting now. I steal these PowerPoint slides from, what is it? I type in free PowerPoint templates, and they let me take whatever I want for some reason. I guess they want me to buy them, but they want me to buy them, but they would give me more choices if I bought them. These are their old ones, I guess, but that's okay. They're new to me. So let's go ahead and get started now that I've made a fool of myself. Here we go. So chapter 3 is about social perception, how we come to understand other people. Um, this chapter looks at the tools and strategies people use to construct social reality. We ask about the cognitive processes involved when individuals are attempting to make sense of the world. That's our social reality. Each of us has a different social reality, and that is because we come from different places. Now, just because you come from almost the same place as your neighbor doesn't mean that your neighbor has the same social reality that you do. Just because I've lived in Saili and shopped in Gallup and Chinle doesn't mean that I have the same social reality that another instructor has. I have some really good friends on the Navajo Nation. My colleague Dr. Barber and I joke back and forth all the time. Professor Maurice Begay and I are really good friends. We lived right next door to each other. He used to borrow the wood out of my wood pile, which is okay with me, of course. I had plenty of wood, and he was perfectly welcome to borrow it since he was only there a couple days a week, and I was there 7 days a week. But since COVID, of course, I'm here and they are there. So, what are we talking about? Oh, social reality. So, their social reality is very, very much different than mine. Uh, Dr. Barber is what in his late 30s, I think, and I'm in my middle 70s. So, and I've lived a lot of different places. Let's see, how many places have I lived? I was born in Indiana, and then I went to college in Indiana. Got my bachelor's degree in Indiana. Then I joined the military, and took my basic training in Texas, and then my specialty training was also in Texas, but it was way up near the Oklahoma border. My basic training was down near the Mexican border, and my specialty training was in Lubbock, or I'm sorry, Shepherd, which is Wichita Falls, which is right on the Red River, and the Red River is the boundary between Oklahoma and Texas. My next training was in Dayton, Ohio. Then my first assignment was in Lubbock, Texas. So here I'm. This is my third stay. That was my third stay in Texas. I was there for 7 years. Then my next assignment was in where was I? Germany, Ramstein, Germany, and my next assignment was at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. My wife stayed in the service and I got out, so I started following her around. The next time we moved we went to Oklahoma City, Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City. Then the next time we moved was to Japan, Misawa Air Force Base in Japan. And from Japan, we went to Mississippi, Columbus, Mississippi. Uh, Most people have never heard of Columbus, Mississippi. That's fine. But you may have heard of Elvis. Elvis is from Tupelo, which is about 40 miles north of Columbus, or the University of Alabama, which is only about 30 miles east of Columbus. So we were in Columbus, and then we went out to California, um, Santa Monica, California, and then we went to Washington, D.C., and then we came back to Shepherd Air Force Base. And then from Shepherd, I started teaching full time up in Montana on the Fort Belknap Reservation, and I was there for 10 years, and then I started teaching at Ashford University in Iowa, and that's where I am right now. Um, where else? Oh, well, I came down to Saline, so I've lived in Arizona as well. So that's my social reality. I was in the military during the Vietnam War. That's my social reality. But and of course, uh, Professor Begay and Professor Barber, much younger than I am. So their social reality is totally different than mine is. I've lived lots of different places, including overseas. What mechanisms come into play when we form impressions of others and make judgments about their behavior and motives? How accurate are these impressions and judgments? And what accounts for errors in perception and judgment that seem to inevitably occur in social interactions? How do we put all the social information together to get a whole picture of our social world? Social psychologists interested in cognition are primarily concerned with how the individual tries to make sense out of what is occurring in his or her world under the uncertain conditions that are part of normal life. As we make sense of our social world and form impressions, we use two forms of processing: automatic processing and controlled processing. The world's got to make sense. We got to feed ourselves, and we have to feed the people around us that we're responsible for. And that's primarily what we are doing. Why do we work? Why do we do the jobs that we do? We do that to take care of ourselves and to take care of people that are important to us. So automatic thinking, automatic processing is any type of information processing that primarily occurs without conscious intention or control. Automatic processes have largely two origins. Some automatic processes seem to be innate. We automatically interpret an upturned mouth as a smile, and we automatically infer that the smiling person is pleased or happy. Such interpretations and inferences, which may be built into our genetic makeup, are beyond our conscious control. So when we see somebody smile, we usually aren't worried that they're going to hurt us. The second type of automatic process is a product of well-practiced activities like reading or driving. Uh, I have fallen asleep while I was driving, and somehow I stayed on the road. I'm not exactly sure how, but it was all automatic, and something in my conscious, subconscious, something allowed me to turn corners. One time, I, one time I drove home. This is when I was living in Omaha. I drove home, and I had to go through Iowa to get home to western Iowa. I had to drive through western Iowa, and then I had to cross a toll bridge to get to my house, which was on the banks of the Missouri River in Plattsmouth, Nebraska. And somehow I woke up. I went to sleep somewhere on the interstate heading down. I was in Iowa, and I turned at the right place, and I paid my bill at the toll booth somehow. And when I woke up, I was in my garage with my foot on the clutch. Oh man, that talk about automatic processing. That was a little weird. Kind of scared me a little bit. What mostly scared me was I was about to take my foot off the. Was the What woke me up was the fact that I was about to pull my foot off the clutch and the car was still in gear, and I would have run into the back of the garage. That's what woke me up, as weird as that sounds. Automatic processing. The methods that we use to judge other people is a thread that seems to be part of our human makeup. Our tendency to prefer the least effortful means of processing social information. We have a limited capacity to understand information and can deal with only relatively small amounts at any one time. We tend to be cognitive misers in the construction of social reality. And this is one of the reasons why people, one of my degrees is in political science. And it amazes me that people don't pay more attention to what's going on. It's politically, because politics affect us. They raise or lower taxes. You have to go to the store and buy milk and everything. All of these things are affected by who is in the White House and what Congress is doing. All this stuff is really important to me because I see it and I've studied it. And so this is real important to me, but so many people don't even pay attention, have no idea what's going on politically in the United States. And it just amazes me since, well, I when I was young, the Vietnam War was going on, and that was huge. I mean, it pulled so many people away from where you were, where you wanted to be. You wanted to be with your friends. You wanted to be with your significant others. You wanted to be around your family, and all of a sudden, people were being snatched off the street and sent to Vietnam. It wasn't quite that bad, of course. We were being trained. We were being drafted into the military and taken overseas. But that's, politics are really important to me because just a ton of stuff was going on. The civil rights movement was going on. Uh, I got all involved in all of that stuff. That was really important to me. And what amazes me is that people just ignore this stuff. They ignore this stuff that has been so important to me, and then they don't understand history. And because they don't understand history, they start arguing about things that they can't really articulate. And one of the reasons is because we are cognitive misers. Being a cognitive miser means that because humans have a limited capacity to understand information, we deal with only small amounts of social information and prefer the least effortful means of processing it. And this is known as Occam's razor, of course. Occam's razor has to do with if there are several explanations as to why something happened, it's the simplest one is usually the right answer. Unless motivated to do otherwise, we use just enough effort to get the job done. In this business of constructing our social world, we are pragmatists. And the reality is, I've got 5 degrees in 4 different areas. And the reality is that these are all 4 of these areas are really important to me. I have 2 degrees in psychology. One is a master's degree and the other is a PhD. Well, my other degrees are in medical laboratory technology, international relations, which is a branch of political science, and then English. And the reality is, I don't know anything about cars. I know nothing about them. I can't fix them. I'm lucky if I can find the gas tank. But if my car broke down, I would have no clue. I've got a tractor in the garage that I haven't started in 2 years, and every time I want to start it, I have to call my friend who's a mechanic, and he comes over and works on it and laughs at me because I haven't done anything with it. I don't know how to do any of this. He said, just adjust the carburetor, and he does this and that, and he takes the carburetor off and he plays with it and gets it going. And of course, I'm a cognitive miser about what I know about, just like everybody else is. And because politics are important to me doesn't mean it's going to be important to other individuals. I have a former colleague, a good friend who lives in Montana, who has never voted. And of course, that's anathema to me. Wow, that's amazing. If the conditions are right, we will bring our willful conscious information processes online. In this case, we would be using controlled processing. Controlled processing involves conscious awareness, attention to the thinking process, and effort. It is defined by several factors. First, we know we are thinking about something. Second, we are aware of the goals of the thought process. And third, we know what choices we are making. That's controlled processing. Even though we may speak about automatic and controlled processes as if they are dichotomies means it's 2 separate things. Meaning 2, cotomies meaning entities, 2 completely different entities. Now I can't say it. Two different categories. There is no clear line between automatic and controlled processing. They exist on a continuum ranging from totally automatic, such as your reflexes, to totally controlled, such as figuring out a difficult math problem, with degrees of more and less automatic thinking in between. Many of our daily activities, such as driving, consist of both automatic and controlled processes. And this is one of the reasons why we are such good drivers. We are such good drivers because we don't have to think about it. And it looks like this guy's asleep, but let's assume he's not, like I was. The process by which we make judgments about others is called impression formation. We are primed by our culture to form impressions of people, and Western culture emphasizes the individual, the importance of what is inside the person as the cause of behavior. We also may be programmed biologically to form impressions of those who might help or hurt us. It is conceivable that early humans who survived were better at making accurate inferences about others and thus had superior survival chances, and those abilities are part of our genetic heritage. This is a famous painting from back east, strangely enough, and these are, of course, they are actually Mohawk warriors who are looking at people's footprints, trying to determine if they are friend or foe. And of course, those are flintlock muskets. So this was back in the 18th century. Forming an accurate impression of others is more complex than meets the eye, as impression accuracy depends on a few factors. Human and Bison's report in 2011 report that well-adjusted individuals show higher levels of normative accuracy than less well-adjusted individuals. Well-adjusted individuals also saw more similarity between their own personality characteristics and those of others than did less well-adjusted individuals. I love Calvin and Hobbes. These are snowmen. He's made a chicken that chopped the head off of a snowman. And his mother's talking about him being well-adjusted. Another factor contributing to impression accuracy is one's level of emotionality. King in 1998 noted that the ability to recognize the emotions of others is crucial to social interaction and an important marker of interpersonal competence. King found that our ability to accurately read other individuals' emotions depends on our own emotional socialization. This personal experience with emotional expressivity, King reasoned, should have an effect on our ability to determine the emotional state of other people. So the more well-adjusted that we are, the more accurately we can read other people's emotions. Look how short her fingers are and how big her palm is. Those are the hands of a peasant. Long, slender fingers with a smaller palm. That's, we won't go into that, as strange as that is. Edwards et al. In 1999 have shown that depressed people are much more tuned to social information and put more effort into trying to determine why people react to them as they do. Depressed people often have problems with social interactions, and this vigilance is aimed at trying to figure out why and perhaps alter these interactions for the better. Edwards and colleagues pointed out that depressed people behave in ways that turn others off. Depressed people have trouble with eye contact, voice pitch, and other gestures, which arouses negative reactions in others. And this, as a psychologist, this is very important. So if you see an individual that is having problems with making eye contact, with their voice pitch being off, making strange gestures, you may be dealing with somebody that is depressed. But just because somebody won't make eye contact, has a strange pitch to their voice, and makes strange gestures doesn't mean that they are depressed. That's one of the reasons, but it can be an indicator. So this is something that, as a psychologist, you might look for. The accuracy of our impressions of others also relates to the target person's characteristics. Physical attractiveness stereotypes implies that what is beautiful is good. In other words, we tend to assume that physically attractive individuals have a wide range of positive characteristics. For example, they're more friendly, they're more warm, and more intelligent than less attractive individuals. Now, this doesn't have to be true. It doesn't mean that it's not true just because I say it's not. But strangely enough, if somebody's pretty, we assume that they're going to be really nice, wonderful people. And that is a dangerous thing to think, especially if you're dealing with somebody who's a psychopath. So just because they're pretty doesn't mean they're good. First impressions, or the primacy effect, can leave such a strong, lasting impression that an individual will maintain the impression even in the face of overwhelming, conflicting impressions. First impressions become perhaps the most important key in information integration. Really weird, just the way that they acted the first time you met them, that's how they're going to act the rest of the time. Is that true? And the answer is, of course not. Even in the face of new and conflicting information that should prompt us to reconsider, most people will stick to their initial judgment. This is known as belief perseverance. Research shows that belief perseverance won't allow jurors to ignore inadmissible evidence. Belief perseverance also explains why scientists have a hard time discounting fabricated published data. People find inconsistent thoughts uncomfortable and unpleasant. Thus, we go with our initial thoughts, and because it takes less effort. Remember, we are cognitive misers. And for that reason, getting old ideas out of our head and accepting new ideas is very difficult for us, as strange as that may seem. And this may be one of the reasons why everybody thought that the world was flat for such a long time, and why it is so difficult to get old ideas out of people's heads. First impressions, or the primacy effect, can leave such a strong, lasting impression. Become perhaps, wait a minute, I've already said this once. Let me say it again. First impressions, or the primacy effect, can leave such a strong, lasting impression that an individual will maintain the impression even in the face of overwhelming. I've already said this. First impressions become perhaps the most important key in information integration, and I need to get rid of that slide. I'm going to write that down. I just made this PowerPoint. Evidently, I put the same thing in there twice. Wait a minute. 15, get rid of. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Sometimes, well, we won't go into that. Putting a PowerPoint together. It doesn't take much to develop an idea that someone that is difficult to change. When someone makes meaningful conclusions about another person's personality based on a brief encounter, it is called thin slicing. And I'm not sure I put that in the quiz, but if that's in the quiz, that's what thin slicing means. It means getting information about somebody from a very small encounter. This happens all the time. We have these ideas about, this person's going to be just really sweet and really nice. And then we meet them and we spend, all of 15 seconds with them. And during that 15 seconds, they are nice. And of course, we will swear on a stack of Bibles that they are just the nicest people in the world. And the reality is we've only had 15 seconds with them. So that's known as thin slicing. And we get these, we can use first impressions and nonverbal communication to our advantage by public speaking, make sure that the opening is strong. Job interviews, dress, make eye contact, body posture all affect evaluations. Handshake quality affects assessment of personality and final hiring recommendations. And these are something that we were hiring someone. This is when I was at Dene, And right after I first arrived, we were trying to find a third psychologist to teach. And so this one person came in, and I shook hands with her, and she grabbed me by both hands, my hand when she shook my hand. And then she moved one of her hands onto my forearm. And she's taller than I am. Everybody's taller than I am. But then she moved her hand onto my forearm, and I thought, you're you're trying to make me think that you're something that you're not. You're trying to use the handshake to fool me, and I didn't like that at all. And so I saw her as as somebody. I saw that as a negative because she was trying to manipulate. I felt like she was trying to manipulate me. And as it turned out, that's exactly what was going on. She was trying to manipulate me. She wanted that job. She wanted it really bad. There's a trend in modern American culture through self-expression, through body art, tattoos, and body piercings. Does the choice of body art affect the first impressions that others form of you? And the answer to this question is yes. Now, this is really important because everybody seems to be tattooing themselves here lately. Body art is very, very popular. As a matter of fact, I have a nephew, my only nephew. Is that right? Yep, he's my only nephew. My only nephew. There were of my brothers and sisters, there were 10 children, or my parents had 10 grandchildren. I have two of them. One of them was my son. Oh, okay, there were eight females out of 10, and only two males, and my son was one of the males, and then my nephew was the other male. But my nephew is tattooed from his neck all the way down to his feet. I've never seen his pelvic region, but I've seen his back, and I've seen his chest, and I've seen his legs, and he's just covered in ink. I mean, he's the painted man, as it were. And he used to put those hoop things in his ears so that he expanded his earlobe, which was a little weird. He's let it grow back now. He's a supervisor, and I was thinking if anybody's seen his tattoos, I just wonder if he would be hired if they knew how many tattoos the kid had. I call him the kid. He's in his 40s. In one study, okay, so the answer is yes. It does affect your first impressions. In one study by Acor in 2001, he had employers view videotapes of potential job applicants and evaluate them. Acor found that applicants with an eyebrow piercing were rated less favorably than applicants without the piercing. A similar effect was found for the presence of or absence of a tattoo. Rezenhoft et al. In 2008 had participants judge a photograph of a female model with or without a tattoo. Rezenhoft et al. Found that the model with the tattoo was rated more negatively than the same model without the tattoo. Now, this is in 2008, 2001. We're in 2024, so it may be that people don't care anymore. I mean, this was over 15 years ago. 2008 and 2001 was almost 25 years ago. So it may be all of this may have changed, as interesting as that may be. I used to work in the emergency. I worked in the emergency room for about 30 years. So one of the things you have to do when you go into the emergency room to draw somebody's blood, or I was a lab tech, so that was my job, is to try to analyze what's going on. And you need to do it very, very rapidly because if there's any danger, you need to get the blood and get out of there. And if there's any danger in the room, the person's aggressive or the person is nervous, then you need to figure it out. So I'm pretty good at reading people. And at the same time, I was a psychologist, and I'm reading people. So I probably see a lot more than I need to. Anyway, I was it was that same hiring cycle We had another lady that came in, and she looked fine. I mean, she was all dressed up and everything, and she did her presentation and whatnot. And when I got close to her, I could see that she had scars on her eyebrow from where she had pierced her eye, and she'd pierced her eyebrow. I'm sorry, not her eye, her eyebrow, all the way across, and there were like five scars of piercings on her eyebrow, and I thought that was kind of interesting. We hired that one. We hired that lady. She didn't try to fool me by shaking hands with me in a friendly manner. In 2005, only about 5% of American adults had a profile on social media. Today, almost 3/4 of American adults have a profile on at least one social networking site. YouTube and Facebook are the most popular of these social media sites, and I'm on both of those, strangely enough. As a matter of fact, my lectures are on YouTube, and I just opened up a Facebook account about 6 months ago. I had been on before, and I got just slammed during the 2016 election. A lot of strange things were going on at that point, and I started getting trolled by various people. Most people on social media tell stories full of self-aggrandizing posts, for example, exotic vacation pictures, recent career or school accomplishments. Obviously, people like to put their best foot forward on social media and present a positive image of themselves. Different elements of a user profile can provide perceivers of clues to different aspects of the profile owner's personality. Observers use the number of friends a person has on social media as a clue to accurately estimate that person's level of extroversion. The more friends they have, the more extroverted they are. Friends' comments can be an accurate clue as to how conscientious a person is. People whose friends' comments on their posts are generally supportive are viewed as more conscientious. Hall et al. In 2013 found that people who posted excessive political or news stories were accurately seen as less agreeable. One personality trait that seems hard to accurately predict from a social media profile is neuroticism. And that was by research from Gosling et al. In 2011. And of course, I do teach a cinematherapy, social media, and gaming class, Psych 321, where we look at all of these things, see the negatives, see the positives in social media and in gaming. And I'm teaching it this semester, so kind of interesting. We'll see what happens. Cultures around the world are different because of the need to adapt differently to different environments. However, there are some norms that cultures universally maintain. The incest taboo is one. There is some form of friendship, respect the friend's privacy, make eye contact while talking, don't divulge things said in confidence. People of higher status are talked to using formal talk, while those of lower status are spoken to familiarly. Language is a strong social identifier. Higher status people are spoken to in a formal manner, and they will speak back to a subordinate in a more familiar manner, using their first names, for example. In most languages, there are two forms of the word you, one that is formal and one used with friends and intimates. In most circumstances, it is for the higher status person to suggest familiarity with the lower status person. I am sure you have heard that 80% of communication is nonverbal. This is why someone with autism spectrum disorder has a problem communicating. They must be taught to attend to people when they are trying to communicate in order to understand the person better. People lower on the autism spectrum, what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, can learn to attend to people easier, and for that reason, they often seem like they have no problems. What can I say about this? When I first started in psychology back in the 70s, when we talked about autism spectrum disorder, we didn't talk about autism spectrum. We talked about autism. Um, 70% of the people suffering from autism at that time were mute. They couldn't speak. As interesting as that is, and now that we have focused on people with this problem, we that's completely reversed. It's rare to find somebody, even with severe autism, who doesn't speak. And it has to do with training. We are training these individuals to be able to attend to other individuals. That's how you learn to speak. And this is just one of the ways that psychology has changed. If you read my old abnormal psych book, I've got one somewhere. Where did I do? What did I do with that thing? Anyway, I've got an old abnormal psychology text from the 1970s. You wouldn't believe it. I mean, it's just so completely different. And of course, in the 1970s, I think we were working on the DSM-3 or the DSM-2. My goodness. And so much of it has changed for the better, of course, because now we can treat more people. Now we have more realistic ideas. We have developed methods of making contact. In the 1970s, the antidepressants were fairly toxic. And now, of course, we have SSRIs. We're learning new things all the time. Psychology is an evolving field, and society changes constantly. And with that change has to come changes in psychology. Nonverbal cues serve a variety of functions. They help us express our emotions. They help us express our attitudes. They help us to express our personality. They cue us to the emotions of others. They cue us as to the attitudes of others. They cue us to the personality of others. The idea that humans communicate through facial expressions goes back to Charles Darwin's The Expressions of the Emotions in Man and Animals, and he wrote that in 1872. Darwin's idea was that primary facial expressions are universal. All humans encode their emotions onto their faces in the form of expressions. All humans can therefore interpret or decode the expressions accurately. And of course, we can see who won. It was Jennifer, I think that's her name. These are all transgender people, by the way. Oh, there's another Jennifer. It was this one. Darwin felt that facial expressions are so expressive because they were necessary ways to communicate before the strength of language. Okay. Early hominids would make a bad face when they tasted something terrible, and that would warn all other hominids to stay away. And she's eating lima beans, and I agree with her. Lima beans are yucky. 6 major emotions. This is disgust. This is happy. This is scared. This is surprised. If we saw somebody who was disgusted, happy, scared, or surprised, we would recognize what emotions they were showing. This is sad and this is angry, and we would recognize that if we saw it. And these are expressions that are maybe universal or maybe not. That's contempt, and that is anxiety. That is shame, and that is determination. That is embarrassment, and the other is envy. That is pride, and the other is not impressed. Decoding facial expressions tend to be complicated, and the question is, are these universal expressions? Contempt, anxiety, those are contempt, anxiety, shame, determination, envy, and embarrassment, and then pride and not impressed. Are those universally facial expressions? And the answer is maybe. Decoding facial expressions tends to be complicated. When the individual is experiencing more than one emotion and all are registered on the face, that's known as affect blending. A facial expression may be ambiguous, and interpretation depends on context and cues. Culture may dictate how a facial expression is interpreted. I had a friend when I was up in Montana, and we went to the grocery store. Anyway, and he saw this girl that he was real attracted to, and so I said, well, we're going to walk. We're walking up and down the aisles, and we said, well, we're going to walk past her. Why don't you say something to her? And so we walked past her. He gave her this mean look, and I said, what was that all about? He said, well, he was native, and he said, well, I need to give her my warrior face. That shows her that I'm serious. And I was thinking, okay, I guess if it works for you, but I'm thinking if you had smiled at her, you might have made more contact. She was not a native, so I'm not sure she saw his facial expression the same way he thought she did. Anyway, yeah, it was his warrior face. Each culture will maintain their own display of rules for facial expressions in nonverbal communication. U.S. cultural norms discourage emotional displays in men. That's a U.S. cultural norm. In Japan, women are discouraged from showing strong emotion and, in fact, will cover their mouths if any emotion is evident. This is very common. They usually do it with their hands. Sometimes, this lady's got a fan, she's covering her mouth. That and the fact they don't like a lot of times their teeth are crooked. Well, that's really kind of weird talking about crooked teeth, but small mouths are found to be far more attractive in women in Japan, and for that reason, sometimes their teeth are not straight. In the United States, the dominant culture admires direct eye contact and equates it with honesty, but in many native cultures and around the world, it is considered rude. In Nigeria, in Puerto Rico, Thailand, and Japan, direct eye contact is considered rude. In Arab countries, their direct eye contact tends to be quite intense. As a matter of fact, by U.S. standards, it is considered piercing or rude. And when I was, first time we went to California, when was that? Wait a minute. In '84. I played on a soccer team with three or four men from Saudi Arabia, and it was really kind of interesting because you would think that they were angry with you. They just glare at you, or I interpreted it as glaring, but what they were doing, they were just making eye contact with you. So, and that a lot of times they would make eye contact with you if they planned to pass you the ball, or if they wanted you to pass them the ball, and it took a while to figure out what we were talking about. This is soccer I'm talking about. One aspect of nonverbal communication that doesn't register with most people is personal space. Some countries demand a great deal of personal space and others very little. The English maintain the most personal space. This would be North Americans, Canadians, and people from the United States. Northern Europeans, Asians, Pakistanis, most Native American groups have fairly large personal space. I used to work with a lady from Canada. She's the one that started the psychology program. And it was really kind of interesting because I'm from Indiana and we have, I'm from a German/English area of Indiana. All the people that I went to high school with either had English names or German names. So the personal space that I expect is pretty large because my last name's Bradways and that's an English name. So yeah, I'm used to a lot of personal space, and here I'm working with this lady from Canada, and she's got this English tradition as well. So we'd be talking to each other, and it was kind of interesting. We needed a whole room just to be away from each other. We couldn't sit beside each other because that's not enough room. We couldn't talk to each other because that was, we were invading each other's space. So if we were standing in a room and talking to each other, we'd be like, 10 or 15 feet apart talking to each other. And if one of us took a step toward the other would take a step backwards. It was really kind of weird. It's a strange English dance where people don't get very close to each other. Now, that's people from England, people from Australia, people from New Zealand, Canada, where they have English traditions, and in the United States. And of course, like I said, my area of Indiana was mostly German and English. But there are some places where you get right next to each other. Other countries have far less personal space. When they converse, they want to close enough to touch the other person. And this happens in France. It's really strange watching two people talk to each other in France because they're right in each other's faces. Southern Europeans, people from Italy, people from Greece, they stand right next to each other so that they can touch them. A lot of times they will touch them. People from the Middle East, people from South America. So anytime you see somebody from another place, a lot of times they stand a lot closer. In the United States and much of the world, flashing two fingers is a symbol of peace, victory, or two. In the rest of the English-speaking world, if you make the gesture with your palm towards you, it means the same as the middle finger. So that's what this guy is doing. He's giving somebody the up your. Actually, I think it means up yours. Thumbs up has only positive connotations in much of the world, but in the Middle East, Italy, and Greece, it means up yours and is undesirable. So hopefully she's not Italian or Greek. In the United States, making a circle with your index finger and thumb means A-OK. But in France, Venezuela, Turkey, and Brazil, it means zero or worthless. In Japan, it is a symbol for money. Coin, it's a coin. The summoning gesture in the United States means death in Singapore and Japan. It's like death is summoning you. In most of the world, left-handed people are tolerated for their backward use of hands, and no one cares. In the Middle East, she's left-handed. He may be left-handed too. These two, but these two people are right-handed. In the Middle East, India, Sri Lanka, and Africa, the use of the left hand for anything isn't tolerated because it is the hand that you wipe yourself with. Hand gestures that are universally recognized in a select culture are referred to as emblems. Emblems are not universal, and this can sometimes lead to trouble. In 1992, President George H.W. Bush thought he was flashing the peace sign, but because he was in Australia, it was equivalent to the finger. And here he is. They got a picture of him. In Norway in 2005, George W. Bush was meeting a crowd of well-wishers when someone in the audience yelled, "Texas." The president immediately threw up the Hook'em Horns sign of the University of Texas Longhorns, and that's what it looks like. Unfortunately, in Norway, the hand gesture is the sign of the devil. Heavy metal, I think it's a sign of the devil as well. We know that the human face processing occurs in the occipital temporal cortex, and that other parts of the brain are involved in determining the identity of the person. And this yellow area is the occipital temporal cortex. We also know that we are quite good at determining basic information about people from their faces. We know that getting information from faces is hardwired in our brains, and we know where that wiring is. It's right there in the occipital temporal cortex. People are not very good at detecting deception. People are just slightly above chance levels, guessing, when detecting deception. In other words, it's a 50-50. It's either a yes or a no. And we're just barely better than average than guessing. However, we are slightly better at detecting the truth. So we're better at detecting the truth than we are detecting lies. An examination of over 1,300 studies concerning lying has shown how faint the traces of deception are. This massive review indicates that there are 158 cues to deception, but many of them are faint or counterintuitive, things that you might not expect. Liars say less than truth tellers and tell stories that are less interesting, less compelling. The stories liars tell us are more complete, more perfect. Liars think more about what they're going to say than do truth tellers, so their stories tend to be more complex. Work done by Carvey, Cuddy, and Yap. This is Dana Carvey, by the way, the comedian. Showed that merely by standing in a high power pose, an individual could raise their testosterone level and feel more confident. So if you sit in your chair this way, or you stand with your hand in your pocket with one foot forward, that's a power pose. And these are power poses. Hands on hips, hands in front of you, leaning on a table. These are low power poses. As you can see, they look all closed off. More low power poses. Here he is covering his crotch, trying to protect himself. Attribution theory is a theory that tries to explain others' behavior. Attribution tends to be attributed either to external causes or internal causes. For example, researchers have discovered that men are more likely to attribute a woman's friendliness to mild sexual interest. This is known as misattribution. This particular misattribution may be one of the main contributing factors to male behavior that women consider sexual harassment or rape. Males universally tend to be more sexually assertive than women. This may be one reason why 23% of women say that they have been forced into unwanted sex, while only 3% of men admit to forcing a woman into an unwanted sex act. Unfortunately, the more sexually aggressive a male, the more likely he is to misread women's communication. Fritz Heider was a Gestalt therapist or psychologist who first proposed the attribution theory in 1958. Heider noted that when someone else does something, gets in front of you in traffic, it is because of internal reasons, revenge or evilness. When we do something that could be considered incorrect, we tend to attribute it to external causes. It's all situational. I'm normally a really nice guy. This time, it was just this situation, and that's a picture of me and my kids. This was taken in 2002, so that's all. It's 22 years old. 22 years ago, this is what I looked like. I was working at Fort Belknap in Montana at the time. That's why I'm wearing the shirt. That's Chief Joseph. Fort Belknap Diabetes Program put on a powwow for Chief Joseph. Anyway, those are my kids. I had just taken my daughter from Langley, Virginia to Boca Raton, Florida. And my son had helped drive the truck. He and I drove the truck, and she drove her car. She was, let's see, this is 2002. Chris was born in 72, so he's 30 in this picture. And Roxy was born in 69, so she's 33. But this is in August. She was born in September. She's about to turn 33. Anyway, there's my kids. And it looks like I'm taller than everybody. I'm standing on a curb. I'm standing on a curb, so everybody looks that much smaller. My son's actually taller than I am. And my daughter's only about 5 feet tall. When deciding about causes of behavior, we can make one of two attributions. What do they do now? My daughter teaches the sciences at Clinton High School in Iowa, and my son works for the government. He's a systems analyst for the feds. When deciding about causes of behavior, we can make one of two attributions. Internal dispositional attribution Infer a person is behaving in a certain way because of something about the person, their attitude, their character, their personality. External situational attribution: infer a person is behaving a certain way because of something about the situation. Assume most people would respond the same way in that situation. Dispositional attribution: my assignment, she's heading in her assignment, he's thinking, so late, you're a lazy bum. And then the other one, he's saying, so late, there may be a family issue. A covariation model is a theory that states that to form an attribution about what caused a person's behavior, we systematically note the pattern between the presence or absence of possible causal factors and whether or not the behavior occurs. Kelly in 1971 assumes that when we are in the process of forming an attribution, we gather information or data. The data we use, according to Kelly, are how persons' behavior co-varies or changes across time, place different actors and different targets of the behavior. By discovering covariation in people's behavior, you're able to reach a judgment about what caused their behavior. The covariation model focuses on observations of behavior across time, place, actors, and targets. It examines how the perceiver chooses either an internal or an external attribution. We make choices about internal versus external attributions by using three pieces of information. Consensus: the extent to which other people behave the same way toward the same stimulus as the actor does. Distinctiveness: the extent to which one particular actor behaves in the same way to different stimuli. Consistency: the extent to which the behavior between one actor and one stimulus is the same across time and circumstances. Internal attribution occurs when consensus is low. Behavior is unique to the person. Distinctiveness: when distinctiveness is low, the person displays the same behavior with different targets and in different situations. When the consistency is high, the person's behavior occurs reliably across occasions. External attribution occurs when consensus is high. Other people behave similarly in the same situation. Distinctiveness is high. The person's behavior is specific to that situation or target, and consistency is high. The person's behavior occurs reliably across occasions. While information about all three dimensions may not be available, people will still make attributions. Most frequently, consistency and distinctiveness are used more than consensus. Attribution is usually a two-step process. When something happens to us involving someone else, our first instinct is to detect an internal attribution. This may be an evolutionary reaction to protect us from a possible attacker. Hopefully, we are open-minded enough to reevaluate our initial response and possibly adjust our initial reaction. Adjustment, however, requires effort and conscious attention. It doesn't always happen. We take personal credit for all of our successes. This is self-serving attributions. We take personal credit for all of our successes. We blame our failures on someone else. So don't worry if you don't pass the class. I'm sure it was my fault. One domain in which self-serving biases may be particularly common is the world of sports, especially among solo athletes for whom the entire weight of winning or losing rests on their shoulders. To maintain their own egos, they must find anyone else to blame for their failures. I used to run track, and of course, when you run in a race, it's you against whoever else is in the race, but it's a kind of a solo thing. If you play basketball, you got four other individuals that are on your team. You play football, there's 10 other individuals. Baseball, softball, it's 9 or 10 others. No, 8 or 9 others. One form of defensive attribution is to believe that bad things happen only to bad people, or at least only to people who make stupid mistakes or poor choices. Therefore, bad things won't happen to us because we won't be that stupid or careless. Melvin Lerner called this the belief in a just world, the assumption that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. There are good things and bad things about just world beliefs. It helps people deal with feelings of vulnerability and mortality, but unfortunately, it often leads to blaming the victim, rape victims, and battered wives. When we think of our own attributional biases and other people's biases, we feel we know that other people have more biases than we do, and this is known as our bias blind spot. So the assumption is that other people have more biases than we do. Humans are amazingly adaptive creatures. A small change in a social situation will affect drastically how a person feels and reacts to the social circumstance. The difficulty for the social scientist is gauging which factor is the most important, the individual's internal criteria or the change in social situation. Thus, people assume that what is presented is the legitimate and perpetual feelings of the actor, and this is known as the fundamental attribution error. And here's an example. When Sylvia plays paintball, she becomes quite aggressive. Tobin had only seen her at the paintball field, so when he saw her at the grocery with her school friends, he greeted her very loudly and called her Mad Dog. The friends had never seen her playing paintball, so they teased the shy girl mercilessly. She was only shy. She was only aggressive on the paintball field. The male ego seems to use fundamental attribution error often to maintain his ego. Peter Ditto set up an experiment where men met a woman, and then the woman rated the men on her impression of them. The men then guessed whether the woman liked them or not. When they were told that her negative circumstance or criticism was part of the experiment, they discounted what she said. But when they were told that her positive comments were part of the experiment, they didn't believe it. They still thought she was attracted to them. Even when we know different, we assume that other people are the way that they act. And this is part of the fundamental attribution error. When trying to explain our own behavior, we tend to attribute behavior to situations. I was angry because everything was going wrong. When explaining other people's behavior, their behavior is what they are. He is hostile because he is an angry person. Voters come to like just elected candidates. It is called the honeymoon period. Contestants value prizes more just after receiving them. People develop an instant liking for those they're about to meet. When Germain goes to parties, he is always amazed at how easily everyone melds with each other. He always feels shy and tense. The reality is probably that everyone feels pretty much the same as Germain. Researchers have known for decades that there is a difference between the perspective of being an actor in an event and an observer in that event. When we are the actor, the environment around us commands our attention. When we watch an event, we watch the actor in the event, and the environment becomes less visible. Thus, the person we see as the focus is always the cause. And this is known as perceptual salience. Let me give you an example. Celeste was working undercover with the meth suppliers in Gallup. Word got back to her that her cover was blown. As she walked past Smokey's Roadhouse on her way to her pickup, she heard a speeding car behind her. She turned and drew her pistol. She caught sight of a man sticking a rifle out the window and fired just as the car swerved into oncoming traffic. As Mary pulled out of Gasmax, across the street from Smokey's, she saw a woman draw a gun, wheel around toward traffic, and fire indiscriminately at a car trying to get out of the way. The car plowed into oncoming traffic. When questioned on the witness stand, she did not see the rifle or perceive the car as speeding, because what was she doing? She was watching the actor. But Celeste knew exactly what was going on, because she was the actor. So she was part of the environment. Mary only focused on the actor and only saw the gun. When we analyze the behavior of others, we often find ourselves asking, what would I have done? This is our search for consensus information. What do other people do when we lack such information? In doing this, we often overestimate the frequency and popularity of our own views of the world. The false consensus bias is simply the tendency to believe that everyone else shares our own feelings and behaviors. So everybody actually believes the way that we do. The notion of self-fulfilling prophecies suggests that we often create our own realities through our expectations. If we are interacting with members of a group we believe to be hostile and dangerous, our actions may provoke the very behavior we're trying to avoid. This does not mean that we inhabit a make-believe world in which there is no reality to what we think and believe. It does mean, however, that our expectations can alter the nature of social reality. I had a friend in high school. Let me call him an acquaintance because he wasn't much of a friend. Anyway, he hated African Americans, hated them. Said they were dangerous, they're all thugs. I had friends who were African Americans and they weren't dangerous and they weren't thugs. But you couldn't convince him of that. So one day he was driving in Muncie and he pulled up to a stoplight, and right next to him pulled a car full of African American males. And he, like an idiot, said something stupid out the window. And it was something untoward, I can assure you. And I'm sure that negative terms were used, racial epithets. And at the next stoplight, by golly, unfortunately he got stopped at the next stoplight. A couple of them jumped out. They started beating him up, and he pulled a knife on one of them, and the guy took it away from him and stabbed him in the stomach. Which I felt was a self-fulfilling prophecy because I knew one of the guys in the car full of African Americans. And he was a nice guy. He's not the one that stabbed him, and he's not one of them that jumped out of the car. But it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, if you act that way toward people, then they're going to act negatively toward you, especially if you do something stupid like he did. Anyway, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. He disliked African Americans, and they in turn attacked him back. One type of self-fulfilling prophecy is behavioral confirmation. This phenomenon occurs when perceivers behave as if their expectations are correct, and the targets then respond in ways that confirm the perceiver's beliefs. When we talk about behavioral confirmation, we're looking at the role of the target's behavior in confirming the perceiver's beliefs. In behavioral confirmation, the social perceiver uses the target's behavior, which is partly shaped by the perceiver's expectations, as evidence that the expectations are correct. And we used to see this in Montana. For some reason, educators in Montana got the idea that American Indians can't do math. And for that reason, they didn't do a very good job of teaching math on the reservation. And because of that, they were right. They did bad teaching, and therefore the people on the reservation were poor at math. Now, strangely enough, somehow, one of the individuals from the reservation was a math major and came back to the reservation and started teaching math, and he actually had no problem because he was an American Indian, and he was from that reservation, and he was able to teach people math, and they responded to him. So, that's a behavioral confirmation. That's what it was, as sad as that is. And that's the first thing I was told when I got up there is, wow, these guys are really bad at math. And I had to teach statistics because I was teaching in psychology and human services, and I had to teach people statistics. I didn't have any problem with it. I just assumed that everybody was able to add and subtract and whatnot. But, the math department had just all kinds of trouble. When we make attributions about the causes of events, we routinely overestimate the strength of our hypothesis. We do this by the way that we search for information concerning our hypothesis, typically tending to engage in search strategy that confirms rather than disconfirms our hypothesis. And this is known as confirmation bias, and this is what we see in politics. If you are conservative, then you tend to watch news that is conservative news. Tend to watch Fox News, and there's another one, I can't remember what it is. But if you're more liberal, you'll watch CNN or MSNBC. And this is all confirmation bias. As cognitive misers, we have a grab bag of tools that help us organize our perceptions effortlessly and automatically. These shortcuts, handy rules of thumb that are part of our cognitive arsenal, are called heuristics. Like illusions, heuristics help us make sense of the social world, but also, like illusions, they can lead us astray. And that's what happened with my acquaintance in high school, because he thought his heuristic was that all African Americans were thugs and dangerous. That was his assumption. That was his heuristic. It got him in trouble. Got him in a lot of trouble. But that's not the only trouble he got into, and it wasn't the only group that he disliked. The availability heuristic is defined as a shortcut used to estimate the frequency or likelihood of an event based on how quickly examples of it come to mind. The availability heuristic tends to bias our interpretations because the ease with which we can imagine an event affects our estimate of how frequently that event occurs. Television and newspapers tend to cover only the most visible violent events. People therefore tend to overestimate incidences of violence and crime, as well as the number of deaths from accidents and murder, because these events are most memorable. As with all cognitive shortcuts, a biased judgment occurs because the sample of people and events that we remember is unlikely to be fair and full. And here's a guy that is drinking beer, he's drinking fast foods, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he's afraid of the Ebola virus that kills, I don't know, maybe 100 people a year. And as you can, this is just in the United States. And of course, Ebola is not in the United States, or we haven't seen it in the United States. Let me give you another example. I had a friend, that was my brother's friend. He wasn't really my friend. He was was convinced that the world was a dangerous place, and so he kept an armory in his house just to protect himself. And his armory consisted of all these military weapons. And I would have conversations. He always maintained 18,000 rounds of ammunition in his house, and I just wonder who do you live around that you need to protect yourself with 18,000 rounds of ammunition? And he would always brag about his new AR-15 or AK-47 or whatever it was. And I had a conversation with him. What are you afraid of? What do you need 18,000 rounds of ammunition for? And his answer was that he needed to protect himself. And I just wondered what he had in his house that he needed protecting. Probably his arsenal. Sometimes we make judgments about the probability of an event or a person falling into a category based on how representative it or the person is of the category. When we make such judgments, we are using the representativeness heuristic. This heuristic gives us something very much like a prototype, an image of the most typical member of a category. And of course, the cartoon has to do with looking at a robin and all of these things. Yes, he's a robin. He flies. He lays eggs. And this is a penguin. He's also a bird, but the only thing he does is have feathers and lays eggs. He doesn't fly. What else doesn't he do? He doesn't fly, he doesn't sing, he doesn't make nests. The base rate fallacy is a type of fallacy in which people tend to ignore the base rate, for example, general prevalence, in favor of the individuating information, i.e. information pertaining only to a specific case. It is the tendency to underuse base rate data and to rely on the spatial characteristics of the person or the situation. Counterfactual thinking is a tendency to create positive alternatives to a negative outcome that actually occurred, especially when we can easily imagine a more positive outcome. Any event that has a negative outcome but allows for a different and easily imagined outcome is vulnerable to counterfactual thinking, an imagined scenario that runs opposite to what really happened. So if you're driving down the road and you had an accident, and you're thinking, man, if I hadn't stopped for gasoline, then I wouldn't have passed this guy right here and we would have run into each other. That's counterfactual thinking. While winners are always happy, research has shown that the unhappiest person on a three-tiered winner's podium is the second-place finisher. The second-place finisher thinks about how he didn't come in first. The third-place finisher is happy because he didn't come in fourth and not win a medal. As you can see, that's second place. There's the happy one, and that she's okay. Here we are. Ooh, look at her face. She's okay, and she's really happy. The happy ones are raising their flowers, and the unhappy ones are not. And that is it. So I'll talk to you again next week.